people within the community to other people who can have expertise that they can pass on to you all. So that's the point of tonight. And I'm lucky tonight to have Nat Rowe, and Nat is the executive director of Flux Factory, which, if you're not aware of Flux Factory, it's really worth looking into it. They, from my point of view, as just a consumer and an audience member, I love going to Flux's shows at their gallery on 29th Street, just north of Queensborough Plaza. Flux have always done really, really interesting work. Nat's going to talk about that, so I won't go on. And then we also have Tomasz with us, and Tomasz is the founder of the Radiator Gallery initially, and now that's expanded to Radiator Studios. So both of these guys have different gallery experiences. There's a little bit of overlapping with the kind of organizations that they run, but we think that they will have hopefully some nuggets of information to you. So tonight what we want to do is maybe have a discussion where we cover things like obvious stuff, like what's the difference between an independent and a commercial gallery, maybe how do you get into a commercial gallery. We will have a question and answer session after the initial little presentation. So if there's something on your mind that you really want to ask, these guys hopefully can illuminate you in some way. We're not here particularly to talk about the big museum-type galleries. You guys, most of you I presume are artists, that's why you're here tonight, and we're trying to provide information that might help you in your careers rather than talk about famous artists in famous galleries. Perhaps let's talk for another subject. So I'm going to stop talking right now. It'd be lovely to see you at the next talk if you would like to come to that one. That's on November the 13th. And if you want to get some refreshments, we can have a little networking and question and answer session. So if you want something right now, this would be a great time. Otherwise, we're going to get started. Anybody need a drink? Right. So the first person I'm going to hand over to, Norma, are we queued up for Nat? Okay. So I want to introduce Nat, please, and then we're going to talk to Tomasz after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. So, my slideshow is not going to be, I'm going to switch up from the slideshow a little bit. It's not going to be completely relevant, because I understand, what we're trying to do here today is talk about how artists get more involved with art spaces. I've been working in community art spaces for maybe 10, 15 years now. So I'll try and talk a little bit about what I've done in that time and maybe link it up to, maybe a more general theory or practice of how you would work with community art spaces in particular. So this is, I did a radio program with WFMU, which is over in Jersey City. I think I started there maybe 2009, something like that. 2008, it says right there. And actually, I can highly recommend this as a place where this is more for musicians, not as much with the visual arts. But, it's typical of the way the logic of these spaces work, which is that it's predominantly volunteer-led. All of the DJs are volunteers over there. They do a big annual fundraising drive where volunteers are coming in and sort of stuffing t-shirts into, envelopes to go out to the donors. And, I was stuffing envelopes there, and then, you kind of started talking to the volunteer director, to the music director, just being around, being at the lunch table there, and eventually they let me start at the 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. radio slot, which after a few years I got a little bit of a better slot. So this is, I guess there are two main ways I see into breaking into these kinds of spaces. One of them is a little bit like that, where you just have to show up, be part of the community. If you really want to do it, start up your own space, so that people are coming to your space and you're forming a community. But this is one of the main idioms, I think, when people are trying to show their work publicly. That's how the sausage is made. If you want to move on to the next slide, right? Because this was a fundraising, that was a fundraising giveaway that we did. You can move on to the next slide. I'm not even going to talk about this. I used to be an artist in a past life. Now I'm an arts worker. So we can Okay, so this is, when I first moved to New York, I started at a place called Silent Barn, which was, lasted for about 12 years and shut down about a year ago. And this is a kind of idiom which I think used to be extremely common in New York City for people to start spaces, get involved with the arts, not as viable in 2019, I think. So I mean, essentially what it was there were a group of musicians. Again, this was a little bit more with the music side. I've been working in the visual arts for maybe just like 6-7 years now. It was music before that. But this was a few musicians got an industrial space, put up some walls, and you can see sort of back here behind these glowing orbs, that was their kitchen. You can see the fridge over there. And that was also the stage. And so this was the whole strategy, is there was like zero budget, and by combining these different use groups, sometimes you call this like an artist loft, sometimes you call it a co-op. Artists have been doing this for like 100 years now. There used to be a ton of underutilized post-industrial spaces, and by conflating those different things that people do in different buildings, you're able to cut down on the cost of it. This used to be a model in New York City, and I think now it's actually for reasons of the competition of the real estate market, and then also the need for compliance with the law in this more competitive real estate market, and also there's not that many more post-industrial spaces left anymore, because there was a finite amount of factories in New York in the first place. I think it's become increasingly difficult to do this, and so this is one of the reasons why I think there's like a crisis in grassroots culture in New York City. But at any rate, this was really our model, because we were just paying cheap rent there, and by sort of combining the square footage, the kitchen square footage was also the square footage of the performance space. And so it's a model like this. I think when you're starting a new space, it's incredibly difficult. Lic is extremely fortunate to have a space given to them. That's one model to start, but if you don't, if you're sort of going it alone, the only way to do it is by cutting costs and spending as little money as possible, and then gradually scaling up your capacity over the course of time, where maybe you have staff, maybe people are paid, you start to be able to pay the artists better. Anyway, let's go. Next slide. Let's keep this thing moving. Oh, and how long am I supposed to talk for? I got like 20 minutes.
You did.
So can you tell me when I have 5 or something like that?
Okay.
I'm just going to keep going on. So we actually, exactly what I was talking about, this model of, these sort of loft spaces. We actually had to leave our space, which was on Wyckoff Ave. Technically, we were in Queens at that point in Ridgewood, and we ended up moving to Bushwick Ave, near the Myrtle Broadway train stop. And at that point, we were all volunteer-led. We didn't really have any staff capacity at all, and so it was really a community. And so the people you're looking at here were a lot of these people were performers and volunteers. People who were helping to paint the walls, helping to set the bar up, but then also would be performing as musicians. So that cooperative model, where you're trying to cut costs as much as possible in a space, and then the people who are helping to run the space are also exhibiting at the space. I mean, that's really the community arts model. You can keep going on. I thought when I was doing the slideshow thing, it was like, show my past, but I don't want to talk about me that much. This is a little bit more of Silent Barn. This was our yard. You can keep going. This was Stolen, who does a lot of really amazing work on the Newtown Creek these days, painting a mural at the Silent Barn. He also works at a fabulous artist. We did at the new Silent Barn space, we had a mixture of, I say new, it's closed now. The most recent Silent Barn space. we did a performance space, we had apartments upstairs, and then we had kind of studios in the back. So this was a little bit like a mini MFTA, if you know Materials for the Arts in this neighborhood. So, you know, it was an artist supply shop that was sort of pay what you will. So there was a mixture, you know, the revenue model was basically a mixture of providing affordable space, where because a lot of people were paying the rent, everybody was able to pay cheap rent. And then also, you know, a performance space which was essentially subsidized by, we ran a bar there, and most of the ticket price went to the artists. Some of it went to the staff. So that was the basic business model of that space. You could keep moving. We caught on fire. Let's keep moving on from that. And this was, we really rocked that building pretty hard. And so that's what it looked like before we closed. So we drove it into the ground. And you can keep going. Okay, so here's Flux Factory. And basically through my experience with Silent Farm was the reason that I was hired over at Flux Factory about 5 years ago. It's a similar space, you know, Richard started talking about it a bit. It started, again, extremely informally in 1994. A group of friends got a post-industrial space on Kent Avenue in Williamsburg. And we've been displaced a few times since then. But again, the model is sort of, you know, from the beginning stages was to cut costs as much as possible, to share those resources, you know, a lot of volunteer culture as part of it, and many of the artists who were helping to make the space, to make it be there, were also the people who were getting involved with the programs. You know, so in addition to, by the way, you know, I was talking about this model becoming difficult to attain in 2019, I think also the politics of volunteerism has gotten difficult because everybody's rent is only going in one direction, and then, you know, and so people's need for, you know, they have to work more, right, and their time is more valuable, and, you know, particularly if you think about who has the free time, who has this privilege to be able to volunteer, you know, sometimes volunteer-led spaces means that there are people who don't have to work as much, and they have the luxury of being able to participate in these spaces. So I think it's increasingly important. I love volunteer spaces, but in some ways it cuts the other direction because you know, you exclude people who need to be paid, who don't have the luxury of being able to you know, work on their passion project. And so you know, people from disadvantaged backgrounds don't have access into these art spaces. They don't get to work there, they don't get to exhibit there. It's like one of the unfortunate things that I think is, you know, coming more into focus about artist-led spaces and volunteer-led spaces. Let's see, what else do I got in this slideshow? So what we do, we have kind of, I'll break it down as two main programs. So we do an artist in residency. So part of what we do is provide affordable rent, affordable studio spaces to artists. This is through open calls. We do 2 of them a year. And so we have private studio spaces. There's 16 of them, about 50 artists move through them over the course of 1 year. And then we have shared workspaces like a woodworking shop, a print shop, you know, different tools and resources that might make it easier for you to be an artist. You know, maybe Final Cut Pro is what you need. You don't, you know, and you don't know how to pirate it online. Or, you know, projectors are super expensive. So, you know, we provide a lot of the tools and the resources and the space, and also the community of peers, so that it makes it more viable to create new work. Oh, that photo looks awful, doesn't it? So that's one of the main things we do is our residency. We also do, I think I probably got a shot in here of our gallery space. So the artists in residence, I really regard it as a resource for them. And so there are kind of 2 models of how we book the gallery space. One of them is that if you become a resident at Flux Factory, you get a share of gallery days. You can do it as a residency solo show, duo show, you curate a group show if that's your thing, but they basically get carte blanche. And then we do 4 quarterly group exhibitions every year. And these are selected through an open call. So if you like subscribe to our mailing list or take a look at our website or something like that, these open calls are available to the general public. Again, there's 2 for the artist in residency every year, and then there's 4 open calls for the group shows. And actually what happens is the artist in residence, we sort of hash out what 4 shows we want to do every year. We kind of debate it and vote on it as a group. And then 4 curatorial themes are chosen. And so, we invite artists from the general public to apply on these curatorial themes. So this was actually a group show that I co-curated with one of the artists in residence last year. We helped start a community garden across the street. There's a green thumb space across the street from Flux Factory. This was one of the works in it where it was like a recreation of a scientific experiment that looked at how long can you bury seeds and they'll still germinate. And so it was a very kind of John Cage type piece, and 20 years from now, we'll dig them up again and plant them. And then 40 years from now, 60 years from now. This was a piece that Christina Milde made. And it was kind of all locally sourced. We got the pipes from Jamaica, Queens, and used different manufacturers from around town to help make these pieces. The teas were foraged from nearby. And next, I don't know, people see this artwork and they're like, oh, it looks like it had already been there, but it was, oh no, I cut that slide. It was so ridiculous to put that in place. You ever make an artwork and people are like, oh, that's nice, and they don't realize that you spent so many hours on it? Anyway, I share your frustration if that's the case for you. So this was Flux Factory. We do a lot of 2D work, a lot of 3D work, but I think we're mostly known for doing work that's, you might call it social practice, socially engaged art. Because it's this artist community that is the residency, a lot of the art that we exhibit is in some way more about the people that are there, more about maybe the participatory action that happens, maybe it's about some political outcome, but these sorts of things are more important than maybe the art object itself. This is, we do a lot of, we exhibit painters as well, but I think we've become known for doing social project work. So this was an event that we did where it was 6 kinds of pie, and each pie was paired with a performance. And so this was, I think there was an aerobics portion to this supper, dinner, performance, Trivial Pursuits event. And one of the reasons that I put this up is I'm actually, again, co-curating a show with another few of the artists in residence for, it's going to be happening in May 2020, and we'll be releasing the open call in a month or 2. This show, we keep calling it Din Din, but it's such a ridiculous name that I don't think we can roll publicly with that. But it'll be about the intersection. It'll be a food and art exhibition. A little bit. We may do another one of these Trivial Pursuits events, but we're going to be inviting people who are cooks, people whose visual art somehow engages food, and I think we'll do a nice Mother's Day food event for people who want to work. That's your creative practice. These are, I just listed a few other spaces, but one of the other things I wanted to talk about, because maybe people are curious about how to exhibit at different spaces. We're not the only place that does open calls, and it's not always the case that you have to hang out and volunteer in a space in order to be shown there. So there are a ton of, I think the artist in residency field has completely exploded. It's almost at a jump the shark moment. They have residencies on an airplane, and there's just an artist residency everywhere you look. Many of them are legitimate though. this I think is a way, applying for residencies is a way then to link in with exhibitions. Sometimes an exhibition space is connected to and maybe in the same building as a residency. And then sometimes, frequently the residency is there so that you can, focus on your work. Oftentimes they are there so that you can connect with, they'll provide, curator visits and critiques so that you can meet people who would maybe, you could work with in the future. Many of them have exhibition opportunities built into them, but this, professional, okay, that's good. This professional development thing is frequently a feature of artists in residencies, whether they're calling it that or not. So there's a bunch of these in New York City, but it's also a way that artists travel, because maybe we don't have vacation money, but it's a way that we can feel glamorous, go out of the country without actually having any money. So there's a great database called ResArtis, ResArtis, and that I think is a little bit more, there's predominantly European spaces that are in ResArtis, and it is the case. New York City, a lot of funding for the arts here. The United States, the NEA, it's okay, but I think in many places, in many European countries, there's more funding allocated, public funding allocated to the arts. It's just how it is over there. And so many of the residencies that you'll see in ResArtis are cushier than you would see in the U.S. Because we don't get the government support. Other than New York City. New York City is world class in terms of public funding. I have to say that. Then there's a New York City-based database called, there's Residency Unlimited, which has been very long-standing and does a lot of listings. And then there's also a new one called Rivet, R-I-V-E-T, and that was actually formed from several people who had been working with residency databases. A person from an organization called China Residencies, which focuses on residency opportunities in China, and then someone who had made a site called Rate My Artist Residency, which actually artists would, I guess it's like Yelp, for artists in residencies. And then as well Sebastian, who had been at Residency Unlimited, they sort of formed this site. So that's maybe you've looked at NIFA before to look for jobs. I know I've been unemployed and looked at NIFA every day. But it's a little bit like the NIFA job listings, but full of residency opportunities and also exhibition opportunities as well. So those are, I don't know, check it out. And I know that's my last slide. I said my piece, so I think we'll keep this thing going. Should I introduce Tomasz? We know each other quite well. Radiator is amazing. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I'm just going to go back a little bit. I'm from Hungary originally. I've been here for 21 years in New York City. So going back and kind of in relationship with before this, going back to what Nat was talking about, when I arrived, I didn't know anything. I only think I knew that you have to live in a loft if you're an artist. That's what they told me. So I was just walking around and just looking for a loft. But at that time, there were, of course, more living workspaces, and especially in Brooklyn, but also in Manhattan. So I found a place in Greenpoint, which they just converted it into they were about to convert. So I took that space. I didn't know anything about it. It was, a lot of artists from all over, mostly America. But, soon we realized that it's in Greenpoint, and we realized that nobody knows where Greenpoint is, and nobody will come to Greenpoint ever for a studio visit. And, we were very young, most of us were very young, but what we knew that you have to kind of come together. So we organized the first, basically, open studios in Greenpoint, 97. It's called the Greenpoint, and we formed a group called Greenpoint Riverfront Artists. And worked really hard on PR, worked really hard on everything to kind of make it happen. So every single person almost in the building, which is like 27 unit, opened up their studios and tried to get people over. And we did that for 2-3 years. And it was pretty successful, but of course super difficult because it's in Greenpoint. But it was great. And the most important thing about it was not that looking back, it's like learning how to create a situation, how to create opportunities, and that by yourself as an artist in New York City, it's basically like a lottery. So you can be lucky or you can create your luck. Basically, these are the two options. And most of the time, you're not gonna be super lucky because it's just, it's a number game. There are so many people who are making art, and there are very few people who want to show your work or spaces. But making work, trying to make it happen. So I'm an artist. So Radiator Gallery and Radiator Arts, which is Radiator Arts is basically studios and gallery. It happened because I wanted to create a situation before, where I was thinking about it as an artist. How can you become an artist and work as an artist during the day in your studio, but also try to make a living? And I think that's also a big issue because you want to make work, you want to show your work, you want to have time to go to galleries, you want to create relationships. How do you create this situation as an artist? And that's very difficult. And sometimes you have this illusion that you're going to be in the creative industry, at least. I'm a jewel designer and a jeweler as well, so I was working as a jewel designer. And you go in and you work, and then you don't have time or you don't have the energy to maybe go into the studio, but then to go out. It's very difficult, and it gets more difficult as you're older you get. So these are just samples of my work from 2002. So basically, just keeping going, and by the time after a while, I realized I wanted to do something. But I also have this inner need of organizing, making things happen. Because sometimes you're an artist and you just don't want to do that. You just want to be in the studio and you just want to show your work. Go back to the studio. So it depends who you are. Not everybody wants to do that part of it. But I also wanted to kind of, almost like another aspect of the creativity, where you give opportunities, want to meet people, want to organize, and that's extra work. And sometimes it gives you another perspective, also for your work, but also where you want to get in terms of showing your work. And one thing that's I don't have a slide from, but when I finish, of course, graduate school is the first. It can be a place where you can start network and meet people besides making work and having great professors, but most importantly, to be able to create friendships where you keep in touch, work together, create group shows. And basically that's what I did. My first, I don't know, and I think we have this, here at Repeti Gallery, actually in Long Island City, which was a great space. After I finished grad school, which was very tumultuous, very problematic, 2 years of grad school, we decided to continue with one of my classmates and create a group show where keep the momentum basically. And of course we were very lucky. We went to Repeti Gallery and we were able to do a big group show where we invited most of the artists from our class, but some other artists, and kind of learn about the curatorial work, but also how to make relationships with galleries and how to fit into this work where nobody basically tells you what happens when you're on your own and you kind of want to show your work. And that was great because it gives you a way into this communal aspect where, if you isolate yourself, you realize if you isolate yourself in New York, then it's going to be really hard. And later, because of this and because of other projects like this, I was invited into a big group show called Escape from New York, which was in New Jersey, in Patterson, New Jersey, which is very, strange, but that show was a huge undertaking by a curator, but she invited very established artists, emerging artists, and people just started in the art world, and basically creates visibility. And again, that was the first place where I really, after grad school, I met a lot of people, and those people were still friends and inviting each other to shows and kind of give you another way of going, and they can introduce you to people. So I think going back to also what Ned was saying with his initiatives, it always goes back to creating small communities, friendships, and small networks where you know that a lot of people together, even just curating a show, it always gives a stronger stance in some ways. And eventually I studied later gallery because after 2008 I was thinking of looking for a space, and I was lucky, and luck is important because I found a space in Long Island City which was in a situation where you didn't need that much money to start it, but you still need to not to be afraid of starting something that somebody doesn't know, and that's it's always scary because you don't know if you're gonna is it gonna work or not. But that was basically the studios, and there was extra space for the gallery there, and I had in mind for a while to do a place where gives opportunities to artists, curators, and curators, and artists who are in between shows or just starting. Again, because I knew that it's really difficult to get into galleries. It's really difficult even just to have a communication with galleries in Chelsea, that time mostly, or in Brooklyn. And I wanted to have a more open platform, but have a similar structure as commercial galleries. So Radiator is basically officially is a commercial gallery, but it runs a little bit like a non-for-profit, where we basically can go on and create shows, and we do want to sell, but if we don't sell, we can still function, and we can also be more creative in that sense. And I was very lucky because after the first show, I started to work together with another artist. Her name is Daniela Kostova, and she's been working with me since as the gallery director, who is a Bulgarian artist. And we kind of developed the shows together. We talked to the people who propose shows, and this is our current show, actually, not 2014, but it's okay. And because of her being also maybe because being Bulgarian and I'm Hungarian, and we have a lot of international artists, international projects, where again we're trying to make it happen on a level that usually artist-run spaces, low-budget spaces cannot do. One thing is I put a lot of effort in the installation, in PR, and also developing the exhibitions, and also figuring out in a creative way how to deal with the same problems that everybody else is, shipping, traveling, getting the artists. So we work with a lot of European or international galleries. We do exchange shows where we show there, they show in our space, curators come here, but again, working with European is galleries or institutions is great because they have a lot of funding, and and also we figure it out, the structure of the shows that can happen, and by doing that, you know, the artists from New York can show in a place that they could not do it otherwise because of financial reasons, or they just don't have the relationships, which is really great, and also, you know, for us as artists, we learn a lot, both of us. My studio is at Radiator, Daniela's studio is in Bushwick, but being in you know, it's always, it's interconnected basically. What we are doing, what the artists learn in the process, and also because it's an artist-run space, we understand a little bit the needs of an artist. And you know, our first show actually was, and accidentally happened that 7 years ago, an artist, a curator actually, who was doing 2 residencies at the same time, doing Residency Unlimited and ISCP, and they sent, Residency Unlimited sent him to us that he wants to do a show, and I didn't have the gallery ready at the time, but he had a really amazing show basically ready, and I told him it's okay, and he told me he wants to do it in 2 weeks. So worked really hard to finish the gallery, and we had a 3-day show with Residency Limited, ISCP, and Radiator, where he curated all 3 projects at the same time. And it was great also because we started this relationship with these institutions who were already very established. And but also again, we were able to help each other, help the artist, and you know, or the curator, because you know, the curators is also sometimes artists, sometimes just curators, but then they organically they help each other, and also it helps afterwards, you know, for the artists who are showing, people come by, they don't know what it is, but they think it's interesting. Curators show up, and they sometimes get a gallery, or you know, they can travel to Europe because they get a show in Europe. So that's, I think, is really great. But well, that's my work. One thing, for example, I'm just looking at the work just for briefly. My work changed the last few years. It got really influenced by the space, because you know, I build a lot of the shows. I build the space out, and this also changed my work a lot, because I do a lot of installations or works that are about building materials, about architecture, interior space. So as an artist, I was also surprised that running a space can really affect what I'm doing back and forth, and you know, work and just basically working with curators, going really deep into the project and the concept. That's really important. So just finishing up very quickly, I will be faster than you are if it's okay. Then we can talk a little bit about with Nat. So the different, I think it's, you know, I was telling Nat that the great thing that I always knew about, for example, Flux Factory, that, you know, I knew that it's also, you have studios there, you have a gallery space, but for some reason, everybody I met, they always knew about that space, even 7 years ago, 8 years ago. They had a great way of communicating the space, and they had this way of putting in people's head that that's an important space and you have to be there. And I think that's really important, because that's why from all aspects of the art world, people go there. Curators, collectors, and just the artists, they know that if they are there, that can give them a jump. At Radiator, we had to build it very slowly, because you know, it took us 7 years, and now people from the art world, they kind of respect the gallery for the programming, because they know that there's not so many spaces like that exist in New York City, and especially what you're saying, and it's mostly because of the real estate prices. So there's very few spaces that are around that you can do it one place that are really cool. And in New York, that's really, I recommend it a lot, is a foundation for artists, because that's one of the last spaces that's a studio building in Manhattan. And they give you, I mean, it's very difficult sometimes to get studios, but they do a lot for the artists. And I think that's also very rare. They bring in studio visits, they help create shows, they bring a lot of people around, they do open studios, which is amazing as well. And of course the one that Matt was saying, all the other spaces that you can apply and radiate the same way. We have an ongoing way of applying, and you can be an artist or a curator and come up and send us an email if you have a good idea. And then we'll meet with you and sit down and see if we can develop it. Sometimes, we tell you to find a curator, or we find a curator for you. But I think it's very important that people really can always reach out with an idea. And which with a lot of galleries in Chelsea, you can't do that. They don't even talk to you, especially because they are just so busy. And I think that's missing, of course, in New York. I wish there were more spaces like that, but there still exist. So now I'm going to finish, and we can talk more a little bit.
Thank you very much to Tomasz and Nat for that. And now we're going to go to questions. Before we do that, I forgot to mention that the LIC Arts Open galleries are also open to proposals. And I've been changing our approach up there, and so I'm lucky tonight to have Caroline Bergonzi and also Karen Dimmitt. And Caroline and Karen have both had solo shows, and Karen's is about to close this week, so there's a couple more days when you could go along and see her lovely, incredible show. And I'm sure many of you know Karen, but it's something else to go and see a body of work. And one thing that I've realized, because I'm sure most of you also know that I didn't start out as a curator, I have no training as a curator, I'm learning on the job, but I've been promoting and been presenting my entire life, and I'm 64 now, so I know a lot about presenting. And presenting music, presenting art, presenting anything, to me, is more or less the same thing in the end. What I would say about Chelsea Galleries is it's kind of an obvious thing, but think about the rent that they're paying. So if your work, which may be lovely and wonderful, but if your work is like, sells at $4,000 for a painting, they would have to sell a lot of paintings every single week to probably even just break even. So therefore, they're only really looking for artists whose work is in the thousands, like the 5 figures, because they've got to pay the rent. And to me, that's just a practical thing. And so it's like Broadway, and again, most of you know I'm an actor now, and I run the theatre, so I look at Broadway in the same way I look at galleries like Pace or whatever. Broadway's not looking at me, Broadway doesn't care about me or the things that I do. It doesn't devalue what we do, but Broadway is big, it's splashy, they need tourists, they need this, they're paying the rent. And they're trying to make a huge amount of money. And so that dictates what they will show. And I feel, not everybody would agree with this, but it's somewhat the same. The model in the large, really, really large commercial galleries, I have no idea what they pay, but it's going to be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month for rent. So, they don't do group shows where people's work is only $1,000 or $5,000. They just couldn't make it work. The model doesn't work. But going back to the LIC Arts Open, we are lucky because we don't have an overhead, because we also, like Flux, sort of donated space here to Leica, LIC Artists. We have donated space from Atlas Capital Group, who are the owners of the factory. And there are costs, there are some expenses, but basically it's possible for me to work with someone like Karen, who deserves a solo show, or Caroline, or anybody who falls into that model. Another local artist is coming up for having a solo shows with us soon, John Kitsis. He's been working on a great series of paintings about the Newtown Creek. It's called Recovered Landscape. So, you know, John's somebody who's, because he's been working really hard on this solo show and produced a body of work on one subject, it worked for me as a curator to put it into the space. So, and then even with the larger space, I got approached recently to do a show called, I think it's called Silent Orchestra. That may not be the exact title, but we're having an artist who's from Arizona, and she's going to take over the entire big space, and it's just going to be her work only. So we've even been able to locate some artists for the giant space who are doing that. In fact, next month when John's in the smaller gallery, we have an artist called Kate Buvash, who's one of the chief commissioning editors from BuzzFeed, and she's building a huge maze. So there's just going to be one big, huge installation in there. And the reason I'm telling you these things is I don't know if this is true, and now I'm going to pose a question to Tanasha and Nat based on my theory, which is that the reputation, I mean, through LIC Arts Open and just being somebody who works with all of you, a frequent question is like, how can we get gallery directors to come here? How can we get, art dealers to come here? Of course, everybody wants to try and sell their work or to get up onto the next rung of the ladder. And those of you who know me have frequently heard me say, well, they will come when they feel that we justify it. Everything I've ever said boils down to that. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. Tanasha and I were talking earlier about the art world still doesn't know enough about LIC. Even with this wonderful space here, which Ejo and the team run, or my big spaces, or Tamasha's spaces, or Nat's space, we're proud of what we've got in the area, but we still have a long way to go to attract that kind of art buyer who will come in and go, yes, I'll buy this, 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 and this. We're not there yet, despite all the work of LIC artists, despite all the work of LIC Arts Open and then the other organizations. We're trying, but in the end it's like, again, I will use a model from Broadway. New York Times will only come to LIC to review a play when they think it's justified. There is almost nothing you can do except give them a big envelope of cash to get them to come and review you. We recently had Hyperallergic do an article, and that was because we're doing the gallery nights, and Hyperallergic seemed to think that that was worthy of coverage. The only other Hyperallergic article we've had, and which is probably two more than some people, was an article they did about 2 years ago about how they felt that LIC Arts Open was a wonderful antidote to the too many art fairs. So they were basically saying, go and see things in the LIC Arts Open, it's better than going to an art fair. Anyway, so what I want to do now is I want to ask you guys whether you would agree with that. Like, do you think that, say somebody like Karen, who put a lot of effort and time into the current show that we have, and you're going to be doing a Jodie McDonald show soon, so that's another local artist who's having a solo show at Radiator. So do you think that reputations for not just the artists but galleries are increased when, as opposed to a group show with like 50 different artists, do you think that a smaller, more directed, focused show impresses those people we're trying to impress?
Sure. I think it's that's true, by the way. But I think it's a little bit more complex. We did several shows that were very different, but the two things that were really hit the mark, was we did 2 Native American contemporary artist exhibitions with the same curator. We did the first one, very political, very relevant, but the most important is Native American contemporary artists, they are not shown in gallery because they don't know what to do with them politically and they don't know how to communicate it. So we had this artist with a curator who was really knowledgeable, and she had a lot of connections. So the first one was very successful. So we did a second one. During that time, we had a lot of articles, write-ups. So we did the second one where we applied for the social justice grant at the Rubin Foundation, which is a huge grant, and usually it's just museums and large galleries get those grants. It's very, very difficult, but we got that grant. And because of the grant, we were able to do some more stuff that we usually do in terms of shipping and PR. And it's interesting, you were saying the New York Times, so then the New York Times writer showed up as I want to write a big article. And it was a great show, great artist, but unique in terms of getting those artists into a gallery. And for me, it was natural that if it's interesting, if it's underrepresented, then we should do it. And we had a big article in the New York Times. It was on the huge photo about the exhibition in the New York Times. It was voted the 10th best exhibition in New York City that year. So there was a lot of big things, and then a lot of these artists that we showed, they were actually in the Whitney Biennial because of the show. And that's great. But at the same time, okay, these things happen, it's great, but PS1, for example, not one curator comes. Over. Why? Because they just, they don't care. It's a little bit like they don't care. It's not their. I think it's very channeled. It's like what is important for a curator in a certain position. Why am I getting paid? I'm getting paid in PS1, not like in the before, because of course PS1 was much more exciting, a few years ago, and they had a studio program, there was things were happening. So everything becomes, of course, very, money oriented and much more corporate, and that's fine. But one thing that I think is important is 2 things. One is understanding the art world on the level that you want to enter the art world, I think. And accepting the realities of the people who are the players in the art world. And then you can be kind of outside of that, or you want to be in it. And then if you want to be in it, then you kind of understand that, let's say a collector does not want to go, like a very wealthy collector, they don't want to go to a 3rd floor Long Island City gallery because they want to stay in a very beautiful space where the driver can stop outside and they walk in and then go out and go to lunch, and they can tell their friends that they bought an artwork from this space. So that's the reality. And the reason is because why not? It's like, okay, if you, that's how you want to spend your day, that's what you want to spend your day. You don't want to spend the day driving out to, there are some people like that, but it's much fewer. So the other thing that what you were saying is like what a lot of people do is creating a group with like 10 artists and pay a certain amount of money to curators, writers, and to come to your studio for half an hour, and then they will come. And again, you have to spend some money to do that, because otherwise it's going to be really, really hard, much harder. You have to work for it. So I think accepting the reality and not expecting also that just people will show up, because they will not show up. I mean, you can, but that's, again, it's very rare, you know. And yes, I mean, in terms of, you know, LIC, I'm sure there's a lot of things can be done. I don't know, for example, I don't know what's your, I mean, Richard, you must know, it's like, you know, if you reach out to PS1, for example, what happens? You know what I mean? You know, I'm just saying, like, yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, we reached out to PS1 many times, and it basically boils down to crickets. And to me, their PS1 warm-up series, they say the community's welcome and they give you free tickets if you want to go to the warm-up. I'm cynical about that. I just think, yeah, you're doing that so you can check the box saying community outreach. It means nothing. They don't actually want you there. They would rather that you were paying and not getting it for free. But, you know, they do it because it checks the box, community outreach. And there was one time where Klaus, who's no longer the executive director there, Klaus Biesenbach came to the garden party. Why? Because I gave an award to Alana Heiss, who founded PS1. And he succeeded her. So he felt honor bound to do that. But where was he the next year when we wanted to come to the garden party? He was on a date with Lana Del Rey, for those of you who know who that was. And I don't want to monopolize this, but I will say one last thing, which was that Joel Shapiro, who you should know is one of our most famous living artists, and he's actually from Sunnyside, Queens. Joel Shapiro invited me to one of his Pace Gallery shows. I went along. There was one photograph that was gigantic. I can't even, I don't know, 20 foot by 12, I don't know, huge. The largest photograph I've ever seen in my life, probably. And I mean a proper print, and not one of those fake things. And Joel had his Rorschach blot paintings, it works on paper. And I looked around at the crowd, and I knew that these were not my people. I was out of place and in the wrong place in the wrong time. You know, it would be nice to think I could move in those circles and then move in this circle too, but you can't. And I think that's an interesting comment you made about decide at where you want to enter the art world. Last thing I want to say, because I don't want to monopolize, is that Caroline, John Kitsis, and Jack Howard Potter, who's also had a solo show, they had to invest a lot of their own money to make that happen. You know, I made it as cheap as I could on my end, and we only charged for the expenses. But, you know, Caroline, you have expenses to make that work. Karen, you've done a lot of work to make your show work. Jack had to pay for huge movers because of his giant work. If you want a solo show and you want that to be really good, there's only two ways to do it, and that's like work, and keep working. And then the other one is like work, and then spend some money too. There really isn't any way to do a good solo show without putting in a huge amount of work. But the return that you get on that is going to be much greater for you than open studios. Again, to Tamasha's point, these art lovers and buyers of real art, it's not on their brand to come to open studios to pop into a little room and see a painting and go, well, that's nice. How much is that? 300? Oh, yeah. I'll take 10. You know, they could probably take your whole collection. That's not what they do. They're not looking for your work. So, unfortunately, you know, I'm always going to push hard to bring purchasers of art to the LIC Arts Open, and I'm sure that Ejo and Norma and everyone here, they're doing their best to bring people here as well, but it's, you know, I don't mean this in a rude way, but you have to wake up and realize, smell the coffee and realize the kind of people that are going to come to open studios are really probably not going to spend more than about $1,000, well, to $2,000. We did have some sales in the last festival of $8,000, so it's not, I'm not saying never, but it's just the kind of brand it is. Matt, what do you think about, I've also noticed with Flux shows, one of the things about Flux shows that seems every show I've seen, you don't really do giant group shows either. Usually it's like one-handers, two people, maybe three, themed. So they're easy to market, right?
We don't really sell work. I heard, like, sometimes I'll hear somebody sold something, but we really, as a nonprofit gallery, we try and get grants in order to pay artists for the materials and some of their time to be able to produce those works. If they sell those works, that's awesome, but I actually have no idea really what's going on. As you and Norman know quite well, we'll do an annual art auction. We've hosted it here several times, and we're like faking it. We don't know actually what, I don't think of art as something that has a monetary value. It's a pretty foreign conception to me. And I mean, I totally see what you're saying about these, there's a perceived in crowd, I think, for some of us, but it's not really, it's not really there. It doesn't really exist to me. And like, I think, you make your own culture. It's funny you said too that Flux had good marketing, because whenever I talk to people about Flux, they're like, oh, I've heard of it. Never been there, but they heard it at least. But so, we'll do...
marketing would be, it's because the shows are very well chosen. That has led to an increase in your reputation, and that's the marketing in itself.
But I think it's about community and grassroots community. And I mean, I remember going to this, Frank, it was at a sparsely attended Flux Factory exhibition, walked over to 550 Gallery, which is maybe, at the bottom of Jackson Ave here, brand new space, no press, none like this in our world, and it was like packed, and it was super fun, and there was some really good work there. You don't need someone else to validate you. You and your friends, and many of the artworks that I've seen sold, it's people who have a personal relationship to that artist. Maybe they've known them for a few years, and so they know what they put into this work, and so they want to support them. Or they care about their friend who worked on this gallery show, and so they want to go out on a Friday night. The New York Times doesn't bring people out to your show. I think the main value of it is I can show it to some of my parents. Or maybe attached to a grant. It looks nice, but it's not real. And one of the things I think is really unfortunate is that, especially since the Great Recession and with the internet and stuff, there's really no local arts press anymore. It got gutted. And so at one point I was like, man, we haven't gotten any write-ups recently. And I was sort of thinking about it, and I was like, there's no one to write us up anymore. Hyperallergic was one of the last, the Village Voice went out of business. Yeah. How can you hang in New York City if the Village Voice can't make it work? Art F City was there for many years, and I think, found it quite difficult to keep their staff going, and, it's a podcast now. Patty's working freelance for many places. And so, just like the economy as a whole, where you got, you're talking about some extremely rich people who are buying artworks with a lot of zeros on it. The middle galleries are all closing down. I don't know about the for-profit world, but I've read many pieces that the middle art galleries that are serving mid-career artists are closing. All the money's going into these Gagosian or whatever. And it's the same with the press as well, where there's these large press entities that just don't have the capacity to cover these small grassroots shows. And so, I think you rely on each other. And, I think that's the strongest way. If you want a gallery show, put on a group show in your studio. Yeah. I seriously think that's the best way to make culture.
There's something else that just occurred to me. I'd love to see what the audience and everyone else thinks. A couple of years ago, I went to Bushwick Open. I walked into a gallery in Bogart Street. There's a big building in Bogart Street full of studios and galleries. And it was confusing to me, being from LIC. I was like, how do they do this? How have they got 8 galleries in this big building and all these studios? Who's paying for all this? Me being me, I walked into a gallery. I went straight up to a woman who was sitting at the counter, and I said, how do you pay the rent here? She was really shocked, what? So rude. But she looked at me, and I said, oh, I'm from LIC, so I just want to know, and she was like, okay. I'll tell you, she said, we make no sales out of this gallery here at all, really, of any significance. We pay our rent for the entire year from the affordable art fair. So what does that tell you? You need to be with somebody. You need to find a gallery that sells at the affordable art fair. That's what that tells me. Anyway, let's take some questions. I'm sure a few of you have questions. Anybody? Yes.
Yeah, I got a question. In this day and age, do you feel like collaboration is more important than competition? Because I feel like strength in numbers could benefit everybody.
Then there is competitions between some of these artists, but that's on this top level. But in terms of like being an artist in general, I think collaboration is just what Nat said, you know, and also creating your own culture, creating your reality. And with collaboration, creating shows in your studio, curating stuff, other places, finding opportunities, that's the most important.
Any more questions? Don't be shy. Yes, I do.
I think the question that I think was posed in your description of the event was, how can an artist get a gallery to notice them? How can you get a gallery to kind of take them on? So what advice would you give an artist? You guys both run spaces. You know, what's a good way for artists to get to know you, to get into your galleries? Or if not yours, in your experience, how would that work?
Yeah, I mean, we take our open calls seriously at Flux Factory, and we'll frequently accept people who we don't know at all. And we, you know, there are a few different criteria. It's pretty typical of what a lot of open calls look like. There's the merit of the work, you know, making sure the photo documentation of your work is looking nice. You know, we also look for people who, you know, indicate in their application that they have an openness to community and that collaboration is somehow something that they're really into. But it also is the case, I mean, the panel is the current artist in residence. The current artist in residence select the next artist in residence at Flux Factory. And so, you know, if they see you around a lot, there's certainly a social dimension to that. If they already knew your work, if they can speak anecdotally to, you know, something that they noticed about you in the past. You know, most panels, I've noticed, do allow panelists to say, you know, anecdotal things that they've learned. Maybe they read something, maybe they know that person. You know, it's sort of rare where they're only restricted to looking at the application itself. I mean, I go, you know, I don't normally try to see like the finest, best art in the city that is the most critically acclaimed. Like, I don't look at critics lists when I want to go out to shows. It's, you know, I like to go where, I like to go to fun events. And so, you know, when I knew a few friends were going over to 550 Gallery, again, this place that was around the block, and I like thought it was really cool there and met a few new artists there. So to me, I don't know, that I'm not saying it's just a social thing and it boils down to that, but like, you know, I think most people, when it's a Friday night, it's not homework time exactly, even if they're also trying to, you know, see some serious art and you know, experience really high quality culture. There's certainly a social, you know, people, it's a form of entertainment and people want to meet other people, so that's such a huge part, you know, yeah, they're not going there to get their MFA. They're, you know, why do we serve wine in galleries if not? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult to get into a gallery, period. But a lot of people do get into galleries. And there's a lot of ways, of course, apply to stuff locally, like apply to Radiator, come to Radiator, talk to us, go to Flux, go to Dorsky, go to Richard's Gallery, go to everywhere and talk to people and see who is open to what you want to do. And at the same time, I think residences, if you can do it, if it's a good residency, it's a good way to meet people and create relationships again. And then when you come back, don't just think that people will just suddenly, like in New York, people, they don't really, you have to go after people after, you know, and okay, write emails, call them, let's do something, let's do this, let's do that. And I think for me, it's very difficult because I didn't grow up in this culture, but if you want to achieve something, like if you, let's say you create an exhibition, then go after people who come to you. Don't just expect that the gallerist or the space will do it for you.
do more and be aggressive in that sense. I mean, be nice, that's what I think, but be aggressive, because to me it's hard, but I know that there are a lot of people who send like 5 to 7 emails, and to me it's weird, but it works, actually, because even though it's irritating, but people respond to it.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how to approach a gallery, a curator, a museum, and so forth, how to get them to look at your work? If you have a body of work and you've worked for 20 years and maybe have been in galleries and museums and so forth in the past, but are not there at the moment, how do you get people to actually look at it? They won't open up they won't look at it on the email, they won't look at it if you walk into the galleries. There's no access, they don't want to see it, they say, basically. So how would you suggest approaching this problem?
Yeah, I find that unless places invite applications, they're actually not taking them, formal or informal.
Yeah, I hear you.
I don't know how these kinds of institutions work exactly, but I even find it quite difficult if people like come up to me and they're wanting me to do something for them. It's actually quite a difficult psychic space to be in, and part of the reason why we do these open calls is like I don't actually sit on the open calls.
And they make lots of money at the open calls. They want you to do the open calls because they make money.
Yeah, some places have to charge. I'm not saying every place charges it fairly, but some places have to charge it just because they don't have the capacity to evaluate all these applications unless they charge a fee. It's definitely preferable if open calls are free, because ultimately, why is the organization there? To provide a service for the artist. I just to add to this a little bit, like I find the way that I used to be a performer and a musician and was exhibiting and stuff like that, and I found that to the extent that I'm not saying you do a favor for someone so that you're like, do me a favor though, but like if you have a studio space, organize a group show there, help other people out.
So one thing which you can do, which I know a lot of artists do, is just you might have to sacrifice and try to get into a studio program for a year. Who do like Elizabeth Foundation, for example. If you go there for a year and they get you.
What's a studio program? What do you mean a studio program?
It's a studio program where you go there for a year. You can sublet your studio here because you say, oh, it didn't work for me here. People didn't come. Elizabeth Foundation, Shop Foundation, other places where you go and you're gonna have a studio there for a year, but they have the relationship, and I'm telling you, the open studios they have twice a year. They create a lot of curators, gallerists, and I know a lot of artists there who got shows, group shows, even solo shows through these programs, because they have their connections, relationships, they know the places to go there. So it's out of your comfort zone because you're gonna have to move into a different studio maybe for a year, but for sure, people will actually go and see it. It could be Sharp, it could be other places. And the other thing I'm saying, you can get together with other, if you don't want to do that, then if you have a lot of friends in Long Island City, get together with 5 to 10 artists and just pay people to come to your studio.
It's not worth targeting the wrong gallery. I walked into, I recently, I don't think I'll be going back, but I went over to Hudson Yards. I looked at the shawarma thing, that disgusting sculpture building thing, and then I went into an art gallery in the Hudson Yards complex. And as soon as I walked in there, I thought, of course. I looked at all the work on the wall. It was all sub-pop art. It's the kind of stuff that looked good in a very expensive apartment, in someone's opinion. And, right, you know what I mean? That's why that work is in there, because of the Hudson Yard crowd. What do you have at Hudson Yard? You have Tiffany's, you have Apple's, you have Dolce & Gabbana, and then you have a gallery that sells really overpriced derivative pop art.
And I've got Long Island City.
Well, you know, but you know, again, Eleanor, look at the community we have here. Look around you now. Look at the age of everybody here. This is not Bushwick.
I love the community.
Well, me too. This is not Bushwick. You have to know who you are, what you've got, and then you take it from there.
But I have to take it from there because this doesn't pay my rent.
I got it. But Tomasz made another point, which I'm going to support, which he was, I think it was Tomasz said, that a lot of your sales will come from your own network. That's what Karen's done. She's been very, very successful with her show that's currently at the LICR Southern Gallery at the Factory. What are you up to now, Karen, in terms of?
I've sold 8 and probably 10. So
Well, 8 or 10 pieces, which is actually a record for us up at the Factory. I'm not taking a lot of the credit other than giving Karen a platform. She's done a lot of work to
Yeah,
get
she's really put herself
Well,
out
that's
there.
another thing. You know, if you're a nobody, where do you think the sales will come from? It's going to come from people that know you and working hard and reaching out to your friends and saying, please, and the same thing with Caroline, you know, she worked really hard to put on a big solo show of her work. Her work is super difficult to transport because it's metal and dangerous. But then Caroline was pushing her friends and pushing her friends and pushing her friends. So was Karen. That's the way it works. I'm sorry. Any more questions? Yeah.
So I think it's interesting, this idea of paying curators to come to your shows, because I think curators, that's part of their job is to go to artist studios and to find new talent, the curators in museums or galleries or whatever. So I'm just curious if you can give some details, some specific details about this method of paying a curator to come to your studio. I would never think to do that.
This is the thing that artists in residencies commonly do.
Yeah.
You know, if they have a bunch of studio space. Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts does this. Flux Factory does this. We'll typically pay like $50, $75, which is really more of a thank you than like a decent wage. And we'll typically have a curator visit. They'll do like 45 minutes for 3 or 4 different artists. We try and team them up with people who maybe their work makes sense for them. Normally, it's actually more productive to have people who are maybe emerging curators who are looking, you know, and hungry, rather than, you know, having someone from a large institution who, you know, maybe just doesn't have the freedom to work with the kinds of artists that they actually like because they have these institutional demands and have to work on a certain level. I mean, I think it's also, this is a little bit separate point, but I feel like it's worth asking yourself if you're pursuing opportunities to exhibit, to sell work, to get a residency, whatever, like, why are you doing this and why does it matter? Because I feel like we keep referring to like making it or something and like it like isn't there and kind of sucks. And like if you get to where you think you want it to get, you're gonna learn that it kind of sucks because like life kind of sucks, right? No, sorry, that sounds negative. But really though, like, is it like, why are you working as an artist? Is it because you really enjoy spending your time on this? Like, maybe you should actually try and get a really nice, you know, it might be easier for you to work at a restaurant and a bar and make a real nice hourly over there so you can spend as much time as possible just working on your work. Like, why is it valuable to show your work in front of other people? Is it because you want to meet them and connect with them? So I feel like artists frequently look for validation in places that are ultimately going to leave them feeling totally burned and aren't going to deliver what they wanted in the first place.
I think
Well, I mean, if you're not interested in selling your art and you're just piling it up, eventually you got to pay rent in order to store it. Now, who is paying your rent?
Yourself.
Yeah, I mean, typically...
Since you're not interested in selling, who is paying your rent?
Yeah, I mean, most
Your
of
parents
the...
or what?
Most of...
Whoever, what?
Yeah, well, that is one of the models, is be born rich. That's one of the models.
Because that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, most of the artists who I know who weren't born rich, you know, there's a few different paths that you tend to go down. One of them is, you know, being an arts worker, maybe being an art handler. That's a viable practice. Sometimes being an arts administrator, that's what I do. what are some of the other, I'm trying to think, yeah, frequently, I think it's actually fully legitimate to have, like, side gigs forever. Your job doesn't, you find that the job that you get in the arts isn't the fulfilling thing you thought it was going to be.
Well,
You're not making $1 out of it.
Arts education as well, working either, going into academia or working with youth is like a great way to pay your bills somewhere in the realm of the arts. But really, like...
Can I get in there?
Yeah.
I think what you're saying about the hobby is very important, because I think you're thinking a very binary way of, which is, I think it's very postmodern. Think if, are you doing this, or are you doing that? But I think what Nat is talking about, and I agree with him, is the intention. If you think that you're a serious artist and your work is very important to you, it's not about how you're making your money to pay for your studios, what your intentions are with your work. So, yeah, you can decide that it's just your hobby.
One doesn't work without the other.
It does work, because if you decide that you want to make a living from some other way...
I don't think you're starving.
I'm just saying you still can be a serious artist and not a hobby painter, only because your financial means doesn't come from selling your work. It doesn't have to be necessarily one thing or another. It's the same thing. You can make completely conceptual work, by the way, which just cannot be sold.
I agree with that.
Okay, then what are you gonna do? Then you still have to make a living, and you not be able to sell the work. So that's, I think, important not to think in this postmodern way anymore, because we left that. We left postmodernism.
But one method is to pay people to come see things, right?
Yeah,
He's not trying to offend you. It's just a reality. It exists in the acting world as well. How do you get in front of a casting director? You can't. They're not interested in you. So the acting business has these things, these nights where casting directors, real ones, are paid to go, and you take a workshop. You have to pay $400 or $600 as an actor to go and take a workshop, just so that the casting director for Law and Order might see you. You do get a chance to talk to them after, and I think you go along and you do your monologue, and so actors are also having to be paid to be seen, right? And then I think there are other models that are very similar. The music business, which I also know a lot about, people nowadays are making records for nothing. So how are they making money? They're making money from touring now, from merchandising, right? So when I started in the music business, you could actually make a living, you could sell your record and get some money. Now, you cannot sell your record. Everybody, hopefully most of you realize that musicians don't get any money from Spotify or iTunes. They get like a percentage of a percentage of a percentage.
But what are you telling me?
I'm telling you that the model did change, and the internet had
Yeah,
a
but
lot.
that's not my model.
Well, unfortunately,
Not the model that you're talking about.
the model changed. So
I've always made my income with painting.
no, we're not saying change your painting. It's changed, in a sense, it's changed the marketing.
We're talking about how to get into art galleries.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you guys are doing here.
That's
How do
the
you
place
create
to
a
make
relationship
money.
with someone who's going to show your work and maybe sell it? Right? And
Also gotta be
there's a
vulnerable.
big separation between a commercial gallery and really what you're dealing with here in Long Island City, which is a lot of independent galleries who have the ability, like what Richard has started with what he's doing, and that is, it's a great space to show your work, and it's up to you to market yourself.
Yeah.
From there on out, you're absolutely right. The game has changed. If you're not well represented on the internet, forget about it. Norma, how many artists have you curated from, just picking from the internet? Going through someone's website until you find the work you want, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, sometimes you submit work, someone submits work to you, you like it, but it's not quite right, so you go to their website, you go to their Instagram, what else are they doing? You're like, oh wow, there's something more appropriate. So yes, the game has changed. If you don't want to play the game, then you take your chances, right? You have to have a website that really represents your work. When you are, let's just start with the lowest hanging fruit. When you're submitting to a gallery, use correct punctuation, right? Use complete sentences. right? Treat the people who are looking at your art with some respect. If they don't get back to you, don't write a snotty email. You might have to contact that person 20 times before they respond to you. And you never know, you're making an impression slowly over time. Right? When you're filling out a submission form, do it correctly. Read the instructions. What is this call for art for? Am I submitting the correct artwork? Right? Because every time, this is a small community here. So every time you put a bad taste in a curator or a gallery director's mouth because you didn't do something correctly, your image is only this big, or it's gigantic, you submitted the wrong size. You put Norma's laughing because it's true, right? You have to follow the directions right there. That's like the bottom line. Follow directions, be well represented online, and then you might start to have a chance. You know? And then the last thing is you need to have your artwork priced at the right place. Right? If your artwork you have listed for $7,000 and you're not selling on the regular basis, you price your artwork too high. You're not going to sell.
If you're going to do anything, if you're going to present in any way, even if it's to a gallery to get them to take you on, or to an art buyer, it's got to be presented properly. And unfortunately these days, I've been saying for the 9 years that I've been working with all of you, like, why don't you have an Instagram? I don't want to hear that you think, oh, Instagram, what's the point? It's a visual medium. You're a visual artist. What are you talking about you don't have an Instagram account? You have to. You have to, as far as I'm concerned. Facebook, maybe not so much. But Instagram, yes, absolutely. Twitter, maybe not. Right? Yeah, you have a point.
Regarding, not if you had mentioned that so far, but renting a space, you know how there's more and more opportunity to actually rent a space for a weekend. I have a friend artist.
So we're renting a gallery or?
No, a space, not a gallery, an actual space. Yeah, and then getting a curator and then mounting a show. I mean, I have a colleague artist. She's done that for a weekend in the West Village.
Yeah, it's talking about pop-up.
And she got a lot of traffic, and she got a lot of. So I don't know how you're familiar with that, and if you could give some information. Second question, because I didn't get the chance to ask as well, is how long in advance do you mount your shows and sort of like in your calendar? Because
I'll just quickly say, anything to do with publicity, it's not worth sending it to press or anything like more than 4 weeks before. Like send it 8 weeks before and it'll get forgotten. And this is a big deal. If it's not a big deal, send your press release about 4 weeks, 3 weeks minimum, and that's it. Those are the rules. That's how listings editors want it. And then, because they're turning around quickly. So they're not thinking 3 months ahead unless it's a quarterly publication. If it's a weekly publication, 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yeah, we do about a month out for publicity as well. I mean, yeah, there are, that sounds like a smart idea to do little pop-ups like that. It's like Uber for galleries, right? I mean, it's a little bit sad that this is the state of New York City, of course. There are, I would add, there's a place like Shashama, Chashama, and then there's also a place, I think they're called Wall Play, that has been doing a lot of pop-ups over on Canal Street. And I mean, the idea here, the model is essentially that these freaking rich people have like underutilized temporary spaces, and so they'll have a bunch of square footage, and it's in the pipeline of whatever, turning it into an office or something like that, but it'll be underutilized for a while. Lower Manhattan Cultural Council also does the same thing. So these are spaces, sometimes it's available for individuals to, you just want to have a studio and show your work, or sometimes it's like I'm a curator or an organization and we want to put on a show. Shashama has a space right near, in Long Island City, near the Materials for the Art space, and they do, temporary projects there specifically to accommodate these kind of pop-up exhibitions. So it's, that's totally a model.
Yeah, I think create your own gallery. I mean, but have the basics. Gentle with you guys. I think that's really important that you have your website, your stuff together right properly. Because there's big competition, and you don't want to compete on that level. You want to compete your work. Create your own gallery pop-ups. I think they're great. At Radiator, actually, we only send out stuff most of the time 10 days before. which is not very good if you want to have, if you want to be in a, for write-ups, sometimes it's not good. People want like 4 weeks, 5 weeks, but we just do 10 days before. There's an installation. Somebody doesn't even like, I have a lot of problems with that at the gallery with curators and artists because they think they can do it in 2 days. We install it like almost 5 days to 7 days before. Most of the time, all the shows at Radiator open Friday night, and we start to install Sunday or Monday, and they have to stop the latest Thursday. It has to be done by Thursday, because we spend a lot of time in the space figuring it out to have the best result for the artist.
Give a big hand, please, to Tomasz Bessie, and also to Matt Rowe. I'd like to thank the artists and the Paxton Gallery and Norma for hosting us. Norma gave me a lot of big help here to get this together. Thank you, Norma. And I'd like to thank Karina over there who's been assisting tonight and helping. And I'm sorry if the message is a little disappointing and not quite as positive as you all hope, but we are trying to serve up a dose of reality, not irreality. And I think that, the one message I would take away from what both these guys said is really, you may not want to hear it, but you've got to get self-motivated and you have to think about what it is you're doing or want to do. And if you can spend a bit more effort than you normally do, it may produce a good result. And that's the best in some ways that you can hope for, because without that effort, there's a famous adage about like a guy who was doing really, really well, and then somebody said there's a recession, so he stopped advertising and suddenly his business failed. Ignore all the conditions that are out.
Finish on an upbeat note, okay?
Pardon?
Why not finish on an upbeat note?
I am about to do that. Thank you, Robin, for that. Nice. Thank you very much. I didn't expect art hecklers, but I got that. Okay, so, really what I want to say is that, I actually think this community is full of really great artists, and in the end, one thing that Orestes said is that, don't think about what the end result is when you're making the art. Make the art first, and then after that, like in terms of your work, Elena, you know that you're a really great painter. And so you need to find those people. You need to find the people that like your kind of painting. If I wanted to release another record, and I wanted to release a punk record, I'm not going to go to a country and western label, right? You have to know who it is that would be interested in you and eliminate the rest, and then the noise will disappear. But thank you very much, everybody, for coming.